Because this is where they buy the politicians. Because this is where power has its seat. Because 99% of us are suffering at the mercy of the madmen on this street. Because all of us are victims of class warfare being waged on us by the 1%. Because these greedy banksters rob the country, leaving us without the means to pay the rent. Because the last time that we had a decent government was about 1932. Because we the people are supposed to run this country, but instead it's all run by and for the few. Because now we know the rich do not pay taxes, but when they need a hand, it's us who bail them out. Because we suspected we lived in a plutocracy, but suddenly of late there is no doubt. So we're gonna stay right here. We're gonna stay right here. Because both my parents lost their savings. Because I have never opened an account. Because the interest on my credit card just doubled, and now I can't pay the minimum amount. Because these budget cuts are just immoral, with our schools as overcrowded as they are. Because there are no buses where I live, but I can't afford to drive a car. Because so many of us don't have health insurance. The rest of us have it, but it sucks. Because the rich are flying in their private jets while the rest of us are slogging through the muck. Because capitalism isn't working. This system has just failed to produce. Because the 1% are prospering while the rest of us just suffer their abuse. So we're gonna stay right here. We're gonna stay right here. Because it has been demonstrated amply that the winners are the ones who stick around. Because this world should belong to everyone, not just the banksters who would smash it to the ground. Because we've noticed voting doesn't change things when the politicians are mostly millionaires. Because we're learning how to stand up like Tunisians, like they did in Tahrir Square, where a young man named Mohammed Bouazizi struck a match that lit up all the earth. And all around the world the spell was broken, and a movement for the future was in birth. Because there's only so much crap the rich can feed us before we figure out which side we're on. Because we've learned if we want our liberation, it will only come if we stay here till the rising of the dawn. So we're gonna stay right here. We're gonna stay right here. Because corporations are not people, and we can't just let them choose. Because if we leave our fate to them, then all of us will surely lose. Because the climate clock is ticking, and we can't just leave our world behind. Because corporate rule isn't working, and it's time for humans' hearts and minds. Because you can't take it with you. Because the rich just do not care. Because it doesn't matter how much you make, but how much you can share. Because these moments don't come often. Because we want truly to be free. Because we know what really matters. Something called society. So we're gonna stay right here. We're gonna stay right here. We're gonna stay right here. We're gonna stay right here.
Welcome to A Growing Concern, and many thanks to David Rovics for starting off the program with such a bang. That was wonderful. And stay tuned. David will be back about 25 minutes into the hour. He'll play another tune or two, and then he'll join us, Erin and I, at the table here and talk a little bit about his experience around the world visiting various Occupy sites. I don't remember which ones, but there was quite a few of them. And so we'll look forward to that. But right now we'll get right into our conversation, which is talking about Occupy Portland. We have Erin Madden here with the Solutions Committee of Occupy Portland. We've had various folks on the program in the past from various different components of the Occupy Portland. There's a whole bunch of different committees that are working on many aspects of getting the 99% back in control of everything that the 99% owns, basically. The 1% does not own this planet. The people do. And we're going to discuss these themes at length here. But welcome to the program, Erin.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Great to be here.
All right. Well, Erin was on the program in the waning days of the Clinton administration, talking about his move for roadless areas. And I bring that up because though Erin is a lawyer working on the environmental issues, she finds that she has to work on other issues as well now.
That's right. That's right. So, yeah, I was here about 12 years ago, I guess,
talking
about President Clinton, who had signed into law a rule to protect roadless areas in our national forests, places that are wild without roads from logging. And I've been working on environmental issues for about 20 years, and I continue to do that in my day job. But since I've been involved with Occupy Portland, I've really gotten a lot more engaged on the issue of corporate personhood and the idea that money equals political speech under our Constitution. Mm-hmm. And I've really found that, we can continue to work to stop old growth logging or to stop pollution from entering our rivers and streams.
XL pipeline.
Exactly, the Keystone XL pipeline, which has been in the news a lot lately. But as long as corporations continue to have the kind of control and influence that they have over our government, those interim victories will continue to just be interim victories, and we really need to wrest control of our government back from these corporations if we're going to see long-term solutions.
That was really demonstrated recently when everybody pushed really hard to get Obama to put the Keystone XL pipeline, which was going to bring down the dirtiest oil in the world from Canada, the tar sands, and he did put that in abeyance. But then right away, the corporations got their lobbyists into Congress, and I think just the other day there was a call for signatures, and in one day they got 750,000 signatures.
802,000 signatures in 24 hours. It was really amazing. Exactly. So President Obama had denied the pipeline because he was put on a very short timeline by Congress to approve it, and he said that he just didn't have enough information about the safety and the environmental effects of it. He decided that he would have to deny it, but the corporations behind it were back in the news, just the very next day, saying they were very certain that the pipeline would eventually get built. And, there's a reason for that. It's because the people and the corporations with the most money in this country get what they want, because they have a lot of influence over our politicians, because they're the ones that are funding their campaigns. And this really comes from a series of Supreme Court decisions over the last over 100 years, actually, but culminating with the Citizens United decision that happened in 2010.
Mm-hmm. We were discussing this over the phone the other day, and I mentioned that I had attended and taped a talk by Jeff Clement. He has a book out called Corporations Are Not People. You can look that title up. You can also look up freespeechforpeople.org and get a little bit of a lowdown on this fella. But he brought up something about a fellow named William Powell, and you said you were familiar with that story.
Well, he was,
and this just kind of brings the whole thing into real perspective in my mind.
Yeah, so he was a Supreme Court justice, but before he was a Supreme Court justice, in fact, I saw the tape of Jeff's talk, and so I knew, as an attorney, I knew Justice Powell from the Supreme Court, but I wasn't aware of the story that he relayed, that he had kind of developed this memorandum, I guess, of how corporations could basically create more control through incremental steps in the courts courts to do that, and then he was appointed to the Supreme Court, I believe by Nixon, not long after that, and it was actually a number of his decisions in the Supreme Court that kind of created the right, or the equation of speech and money in our political system, and then gave corporations the ability to spend money to influence elections as a protected First Amendment right.
Sure. And as we started off the program, back then people were dealing with environmental issues, dealing with gay rights issues, still trying to deal with civil rights issues, and they were dealing with all these as separate components.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, it's interesting that you bring up civil rights, because the first Supreme Court case that kind of created this idea of corporate personhood actually arose out of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which was the amendment that was adopted, the Equal Protection Clause that was made to protect the freed slaves and to ensure that they had the equal protection of the law as free white people. And it was actually an 1886 case where a railroad company actually sued a county, saying that they couldn't tax them on certain property because they were not being taxed the same as people, and they made the argument that they were people under the Constitution and therefore had the right to be protected under the 14th Amendment. And so the Supreme Court actually said that yes, we agree with you that persons refers to both natural persons and artificial persons like corporations, and therefore this amendment that was created to provide rights to freed slaves was actually used to protect the rights of corporations.
I know Tom Hartman goes into that at length in his book. What was the name of the?
Unequal Protection is the name of Tom Hartman's book. Yeah, I'm actually reading that book right now. It's a really fascinating look at the history of corporate personhood and corporate control and how it has expanded over the years. So it started, a lot of people don't know that 1886 was the first case that actually addressed this. And then over the years, it's just been expanded to have different amendments to our Constitution, different rights applied to corporations. And it was a case in 1976 where they first said that spending money in elections is the equivalent of protected speech under the First Amendment, and then a 1978 case that said that corporations actually enjoy this First Amendment right to spend money freely in elections.
So this most recent decision that has just outraged people so much, the Citizens United, is really just the latest.
It is. It's not the first, and a lot of people think it was sort of the first that created these things.
It came out of nowhere.
It actually is just an expansion of these rights that have been developed over time. So this was a 2010 decision, Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, and it was a 5-4 decision. So we have 9 justices. It was a very narrow win for the corporation in this case, but basically in that case, the Supreme Court said that the First Amendment prohibits the government from putting limits on independent expenditures by corporations for the purpose of influencing election. And the reason that I think it outraged people to such a degree is that the court really could have decided the case on a much narrower ground, but it actually took it upon itself to kind of create this expansive loophole when it really didn't have to. And it seemed that the Justices Scalia and Thomas and the others in the majority really went out of their way to create this expansive right that for the first time basically said that corporations can use their general treasury funds in any way that they see fit for independent expenditures. They can't give it directly to candidates, but they can use it to create commercials and ads and do different work on behalf of a candidate's campaign.
Just bookkeeping is all.
Right. Yeah. Well, the idea is they can't coordinate with the candidate, but that's certainly not how this is playing out over time. And so, the law that they actually challenged was a bipartisan campaign finance reform law called sometimes referred to as McCain-Feingold, and it was a 2002 law. The Supreme Court had actually previously upheld the law in an earlier case. And then in this 2010 case, the dispute was over whether Citizens United could play this movie they called Hillary. And it was a movie that was pretty denigrating to then presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. And they wanted to show it within a certain time before the election, and they wanted to put ads out on TV about the movie. And those ads had Hillary in them and were pretty negative towards Hillary Clinton. And the law said that you couldn't do something like that within 30 days of a primary or 60 days of an election. So within that time period, you couldn't do these electioneering communications that showed the candidate and had some means to influence the election. And they challenged that, and the court did say that they struck down that part of the law, and then said that basically the government was prohibited from regulating or prohibiting any kind of spending by corporations, either for profit or nonprofit, for the purpose of independent expenditures to influence elections.
So, contrary to what I never in my mind thought about this and believed this, but it was always back in my mind somewhere that of the three departments or whatever of the government, the executive, judicial and legislative, that the judicial was probably the most honest and the most real. But here we have the Roberts Court, which is, Justice Roberts is the supreme commander, and making different decisions that were made. How long ago?
Right. The only thing that changed in the time between the time in, I think, 2003 when the court actually upheld the law and in 2010 when they struck down portions of it was the makeup of the court. So Chief Justice Rehnquist passed away, Sandra Day O'Connor left the court, Alito and Roberts came in, and like I said, it was a 5-4 decision. And what's interesting is that Chief Justice Rehnquist, who's the previous Chief Justice, is actually not considered a liberal member of the court by any stretch. He was very conservative, but he actually wrote a dissent in those earlier 1970s cases that said that, money is speech. He actually wrote a dissent in those cases saying, no, money is not the same as speech, and speech is a different animal. And I think that's what's interesting about this issue of corporate personhood and the idea of money as a speech is it's not a left or right issue. It's not a Democrat or Republican issue. There was actually a poll done right after the Citizens United decision came out by ABC News and the Washington Post, and 80% of people polled said that they disagreed with the Supreme Court's decision. And these were people across the political spectrum. So when you have a conservative justice like Justice Rehnquist, who had previously found that these types of rights do not equate with speech, or that money does not equate to speech, and the fact that he and Justice O'Connor, when they were on the court, actually upheld many portions of this law, and then when they left the court, that it changed. I think it's an example of the fact that this is an issue that affects all of us. It doesn't just affect us if we're liberal or conservative. It affects everybody because it means that corporations have really unlimited influence over elections at this point.
And they're not shy of expressing that. Well, this brings us up to a good point to bring in this little video. It was the Occupy the Courts, which was January 20th, all around the country. Folks were occupying the courts, and looks like we're just going into it here right away here. And this is Barbara Dudley addressing that issue. It's probably about a 3-minute clip.
Business has rights, and to their delight, corporations are persons now.
This country was born in a struggle between the 99% and the 1%.
This country was born in a struggle between the 99% and the 1%.
You know about Shays' Rebellion?
You know about Shays' Rebellion?
The farmers who fought the Revolutionary War?
The farmers who fought the Revolutionary War!
Who got stuck with the war debt and bailed out the 1%?
Who got stuck with the war debt and bailed out the 1%!
This Constitution was written to keep that rabble down.
This Constitution was written to keep that rabble down!
And we are that rabble.
And we are that rabble!
The First Amendment that protects your free speech.
The First Amendment that protects your free speech.
And your freedom of assembly.
And your freedom of assembly.
Was written because we fought for it.
Was written because we fought for it.
Not because the Founding Fathers wanted it.
Not because the Founding Fathers wanted it.
The Supreme Court was created to protect property.
The Supreme Court was created to protect property.
We should not kid ourselves that an amendment to the Constitution will stop that.
We should not kid ourselves that an amendment to the Constitution will stop that.
After the Civil War, we wrote amendments.
After the Civil War, we wrote amendments.
We freed freed the slaves with the 13th Amendment.
We freed the slaves with the 13th Amendment.
We guaranteed equal protection with the 14th Amendment.
We guaranteed equal protection with the 14th Amendment.
30 years later, the Supreme Court said segregation was legal.
30 years later, the Supreme Court said segregation was legal.
We had to fight with a civil rights movement
We had to fight with the civil rights movement
to get that reversed.
to get that reversed.
We had to fight with a suffrage movement to get the right to vote for women.
We had to fight with the suffrage movement to get the right to vote for women.
So passing an amendment is nothing but the first step.
So passing an amendment is nothing but the first step.
Thomas and Scalia need to resign from this court.
Thomas and Scalia need to resign from this court.
We need to occupy the courts
We need to occupy the courts
and take back our democracy.
and take back our democracy.
Occupy the courts.
Occupy the courts. Oh dear, what can the matter be? Big money is killing democracy. We're fed up with the fat cat's hypocrisy. We need to move to a man. Corporations are candidates who help the wealthy while poor people cannot afford to stay healthy. Our tax money's wasted on bombs that are stealthy, so we need to move to a man.
So the other day, I saw an interview with Bill Moyers, and he said that he would believe that corporations were people when Texas executed one. And I thought that that really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? Yeah. Because it's not just that corporate personhood and Citizens United place our democracy up for sale to the highest bidder. It is a slap in the face to what it means to be human.
Yes.
And what I find offensive about the whole idea isn't just that corporations have been raised to the level of human beings, but that the miracle of human existence has been reduced in stature to the level of corporations. And for me, this is the real point, the real sign of our times that we must resist at every turn. It is the dehumanization of our society. Because this country was not founded to serve corporations. This country was founded on the idea that the most important element in our society, the most fundamental component, the sacred thing which must never be violated, are the people. It are the human beings that matter. We are what matter most, not the corporations, not the government, and not the representatives. It seems obvious, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But we have to say it again and again and again until we get it right once and for all. Because America is not a business. America is our home.
All right, that's a good place to clip it off right there. America is not a business. America is our home. So we're going to talk a little bit about what we can do to make that happen here. There's been a lot of movement in that direction all over the country. Next week we're going to have Paul Cienfuegos on, who's paulcienfuegos.com, I believe, that has a lot of directions that he's working in, and we're going to talk about some other ones right here.
Great. Yeah. So one thing that Occupy Portland has really taken on the issue of corporate personhood. In fact, it was one of the first kind of substantive proposals that Occupy Portland passed back when in the camp, actually back in October, before the eviction from Chapman and Lonsdale Square. Basically, that we agreed that we would work to end corporate personhood. And actually, the city of Portland recently took up that issue. One thing that really the push around the country right now is for a constitutional amendment that says that corporations are not people and they're not entitled to the protections of the Constitution, and that money is not the same as political speech and therefore can be regulated or prohibited in election campaigns. And Move to Amend is the national organization that's really been pushing this. We saw a really great resolution come out of the city of Portland actually supporting a constitutional amendment a couple of months ago. Mayor Adams proposed this resolution, and Occupy Portland was fortunate enough to have an opportunity to meet with his staff, members of the Solutions Committee, as well as the group Move to Amend, the local chapter. We worked with his staff to really strengthen that resolution. We got actually 2,000 comments into the mayor's office asking for specific changes to the resolution to make it stronger. And we actually ended up they ended up adopting language that the Solutions Committee wrote to help improve that resolution. And in the end, we did get a resolution out of the City Council that supports a constitutional amendment making clear that corporations are not people entitled to the rights of the Constitution, and that money is not speech, and asking our representatives in Congress to work to move or to adopt a resolution in support of a constitutional amendment so that we can move this issue forward.
And other cities have done this, LA and a few others. Have any municipalities larger than a city done this?
So City of Los Angeles and City of New York are the two largest municipalities around the country that have done that.
Bigger than some counties.
Right. But actually, the next step for the local Move to Amend chapter is to get Multnomah County to pass a resolution similar to what we saw out of the city. And so actually just this week, a couple members from the local Move to Amend chapter went and testified before the county commission on this issue. Myself and some folks from Occupy Portland will be going to testify again in a few weeks and really start to bring this issue to their attention, because it's not something that, unfortunately, even though a lot of people know about the Citizens United decision, a lot of people still don't know what corporate personhood is. They don't know why it's an important issue that everyone should care about. And so it's really, the first step is really educating our county commissioners about it and hoping that we can work with them to adopt a resolution similar to what the city adopted. And actually, folks can call Jeff Kogan. He's the chair of the Multnomah County Commission.
We've got a graphic for that.
Great. So his phone number, I can just tell you right now, is 503-988-3308. And folks can call his office if this is an issue you're concerned about and ask that the county work to pass a resolution supporting a constitutional amendment in this regard.
Has there been any other counties yet?
Not in Oregon. However, the city of Corvallis just last week, the city council approved referring a resolution to the voters of Corvallis so that they can vote to approve a resolution supporting an amendment. And then a city councilor down in Coos Bay has introduced a resolution for the city council there. And so folks are working on getting support among the city councilors in Coos Bay. I know the folks at Occupy Eugene have been working towards a city council resolution there. And then some folks in Astoria have also expressed interest in working on that. And so something that the Solutions Committee of Occupy Portland is really working on now is doing some outreach to other occupations around the state, kind of to share our experience of how things worked here in Portland, maybe offer some what worked, what didn't, things like that to help them really push this forward. And then we're also looking at whether there are some smaller suburbs of Portland that we could be working to get resolutions in. And the idea is really that as we build this from the grassroots up, we get these resolutions at the local level, move up to the county level. Hopefully, eventually we move up to the state level and we get some state legislatures passing these resolutions. Ultimately, what it takes for a constitutional amendment is 2/3 of each, both the Senate and the House in the federal government, to adopt it, and then it goes to the states for ratification, and there has to be 3/4 of the states that ratify it. So the idea is if we can get states to pass these resolutions supporting this amendment, when we get it sent back to them for ratification, we can hold up that resolution and say, you've supported this, now it's time to ratify it, and ultimately, hopefully, we get a constitutional amendment out of it. It is a very daunting process, but as long, if we can get everybody that's concerned, all those 80% of people who are against Citizens United to be talking to their representatives, both at the local, state, and federal level, we can make it a reality.
Right. Well, I think we'll get a big shot in the arm. Most of the money I think that's spent on these campaigns is going to the media, and so the media is not going to be out there trying to give us any kind of election reform, but they do like to talk about how much money is being raised and how much money is being spent. And so I think people will have a pretty good idea of the effects of this Citizens United by November or whatever it's going to be this year, when the elections returns come in and people realize that the billions of dollars that are being spent, maybe that might kind of work to get people motivated.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that these kind of super PACs grew out of the Citizens United decision has really gotten a lot of people's attention. And the kind of money that's being spent, particularly in the Republican primary right now, is really astounding to people. You know, you hear one individual or one corporation donating $4 million to a super PAC in order to allow them to put these ads up in these places where the primaries are happening. I mean, that's astounding. In fact, there was a study that was done that showed that between 2010 and 2011, these super PACs raised $181 million, and half of that came from just 200 people or corporations. So this is really the super wealthy that are making these donations. 90% of the donations are $10,000 and higher to these super PACs.
I just saw on one of the stations where I might have been Foster Freeze. I'm not sure what a name, but anyway, he gave $10 million to the super PAC for Rick Santorum, and he's getting ready to give another $10 million.
Right, because there's no limit on how much you can give to these super PACs, and so both corporations and individuals are giving millions and millions of dollars, and they certainly expect something in return for their investment.
Wasn't there a move during that to ameliorate it to some degree by having people having to declare? But
right.
that
So disclosure is one way to ensure that we at least know who's having to donate or who's donating. And actually, there are some disclosure requirements with super PACs. However, the disclosure comes many months after the donations are made.
That's right.
So often with these primaries, for example, the primary is over with before we have any idea who's given this money. The one big loophole with the super PACs is that nonprofits can donate to super PACs, and they don't actually have to disclose where their funding is coming from. So individuals who don't want their money traced can simply donate to some kind of nonprofit corporation who then gives the money to the super PAC, and it basically means that that money is untraceable. And this same study that I had referenced found that about 10% of the money is completely untraceable because of this loophole in the super PAC law.
Mm-hmm. Deliberately put in place by the people that have the money, and it's the individuals, but quite often it's the corporations.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because the mainstream media, you know, you're right, they're getting money from this because they're the ones they're buying the commercial time from and that kind of thing. So they don't tend to report on this. But the actually what's interesting is that the sheer amount of money that's going into these super PACs and the amount that they're spending, it's actually getting attention in a lot of places that you wouldn't expect. And so I think it's gotten so big and so outrageous to so many people who are just normal people making a normal salary who don't have $10,000 or $10 million, that it really has. It's kind of so shocking that it's actually gotten the attention of the mainstream media, and so a lot more people are starting to realize that, you know, this is not right for our election process.
I forget who it was, but one of the news programs was saying that such and such person spent such and such amount, a large amount of money, and then I think it might have been Mitt Romney spent a certain amount of money, and it would have been like a normal average person's spending $45.
Right. Well, when you're a multimillionaire, yeah, a few $1 million is no big deal when you're worth $200 million. So, you know, it's really calling attention not only to the problem and the influence of the corrupting influence of money in our election system, but it's also really drawing attention to the real disparity between the 99% in this country and the 1%, and the fact that the 1% absolutely is controlling our election system at this point. And we really have to come up with some creative solutions, even if it takes a long time to get a constitutional amendment. I think the momentum is building for that because people are absolutely outraged that they have lost all control and have no voice in our system anymore.
Yeah, which kind of brings up the point of how foolish, at least to me, the media looked like at the very beginning of the Occupy Wall Street movement, saying, you know, what is it you're saying? You know, what are your issues? When, you know, the issues were so obvious. They were sitting there telling them about the disparity, why we're called the 99%, and what the 1% is all about, and they're still scratching their heads saying, well, they don't really have any real strong issues.
Right. Well, if you can't put it into a 30-second soundbite, the media doesn't want to hear it. And so, you know, the fact of the matter is the injustices have grown, the disparity has grown so much between the 99% and the 1%. The number of issues has grown exponentially with that. And so it's very difficult to boil that down into a 30-second soundbite that they can run on CNN or, you know, on regular TV. And so, you know, the issues are deeper than that. And corporate personhood and the issue of money being the same as speech is just one of those issues that's really driving so many problems in our country and really is highlighting the disparity in this country between the haves and the have-nots.
Sure. Well, they may have had a hard time getting it down to a soundbite, but David Rovics, he didn't have a hard time getting it down to a 5-minute tune earlier. And you gave a pretty good job of what it's all about. With your parents. I forget what it was that they lost their jobs or they
lost their savings. I mean, but the thing is though, I think that the 1%, 99% thing actually is a great little soundbite. I mean, actually, if the media doesn't actually get that, then it's a real sign of either idiocy or corporate complete corporate control. Because any journalist that doesn't understand what the point is when you're talking about 1% and 99% is not fit to be a journalist. I mean, it's ridiculous.
At least we would hope so. So bring us a couple more tunes, David, and we'll set you up a chair here and you can join us.
I turned on my TV, though it was hard to see these men who would be head of state. What a great country from sea to shining sea. We watched the Republicans debate. Newt stood with his third wife and said, "You bet your life, the president is a red. He wants to tax the rich a lot and take your limo and your yacht. He wants to have the bankers' heads. And if he gets in again, he'll paint the White House pink and then he'll hire Chavez as his VP. Then we'll be right on track to give capitalism the sack along with the insurance industry. If only it were true, if only it were true, I'd be so happy, wouldn't you? If only it were true, if only it were true, if only it were true. He'll give everyone food stamps and wheelchair ramps. He'll subsidize windmills and maple syrup. He'll cripple industries with eco-friendly policies, and pretty soon we will be just like Europe. He'll shut down oil wells and deliver solar cells to each home in Delaware and Illinois. He'll ban logging in the parks. He'll send the works of Karl Marx to the homes of every American girl and boy. He'll abolish pesticides. He'll be giving out free rides and free lunches, too, in his high-speed trains. He'll start lots of public works full of union perks. He'll fill all the cities up with bicycle lanes. If only it were true, if only it were true, I'd be so happy, wouldn't you? If only it were true, if only it were true, if only it were true. Watch out, his critics tell, this shall be our death knell. He'll pull the troops out and end all of our wars. He'll gut military spending, our empire will be ending, and soon we'll be invaded by the Moors. He'll legalize all drugs, give away beer mugs and hookahs to every child, and Korans. He'll ban religions from the schools, give 40 acres and a mule to every person who makes less than 50 grand. He'll shut down Guantanamo to torture, he'll say no. He'll make us all drive electric cars. He'll reinstate the fairness doctrine, take off that damn flag pin, and he'll put Rupert Murdoch behind bars. If only it were true, if only it were true, I'd be so happy, wouldn't you? If only it were true, if only it were true, if only it were true. If only it were true, if only it were true, I'd be so happy, wouldn't you? If only it were true, if only it were true, if only it were true. And now, so that was If Only. Or am I supposed to move on to another song? I don't have this very seamlessly, set up here. My lyrics are on my iPad. So it's very high-tech folk musician, but these are new songs. And then I have to retune, All right, well. Definitely don't have to explain what this song is about for anybody that is actually watching community television. You already know. Happened again last night. Happens every time I play. When the gig is over, someone has to say a question that appears to be on everybody's brain as they're driving down the highway. in the commuter lanes. It sure is not just me, it's the 99% of artists who are wondering about the thousands they just spent on a CD that will never make it to the air. Now all of us are grown-ups here. We know life isn't fair, but the answer to the question is one I'd really like to know. Why don't they play you on the radio? Why don't they play you on the radio? Perhaps my songs are too cerebral. They don't make you dance. My melodies are boring. There's no spandex in my pants. Maybe it's because I don't use a drum machine. Maybe I'm too old, or maybe I'm too green. Maybe folks don't want to hear it. They don't want to analyze anything more complex than the space between your thighs. Maybe I should wear more glitter, go to parties in an egg. Perhaps I need to go electric or show a bit more leg, but it's something I must wonder at the end of every show. Why don't they play you on the radio? Why don't they play you on the radio? I'm sure there's an exception to each and every rule, but perhaps I'm too political and not a useful tool to keep the music in the background and the commercials in the fore, to keep the shoppers shopping, not protesting the war, to keep the lemmings humming the same 300 songs, the songs they pray throughout the year, each night and all day long. Maybe I just don't make the grade to be one of the chosen few. Perhaps there was a sign somewhere and I just missed the cue, or I need to change my name to Bruce or Silvio. Why don't they play you on the radio? Why don't they play you on the radio? It could be I just don't have the talent that's involved. I'm lacking the commitment, I'm insufficiently resolved. Or maybe there just aren't a million people who might buy more records made by some whiny left-wing guy. Or maybe they would, but I'm just out of luck, because I don't have a label that can spend $1 million, because Sony and Clear Channel have taken over everything. And you got to pay the piper if you want to make the piper sing. And it's the king who tells the paper where to go. Why don't they play you on the radio? Why don't they play you on the radio? Why don't they play you on the radio? Why don't they play you on the radio?
Well, they don't play on the radio because you got something to say. Well, David will come over and join us for the 15 minutes or so we got left. He just hook his mic up any way that he can. Mm-hmm. But there's so many incredible musicians that I know of just here locally. Seattle, Jim Page, Southern Oregon, Alice D. Michelli, who has these themes that sing these songs that really speak about where people are living in their lives. And, of course, corporate media, they don't want to talk about it. Corporate media in this case meaning the music industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Although there's stuff that slips through the cracks for one reason or another. I mean, there are some fantastic artists and bands that have sold many millions of records now and historically. No question about it. It's not that they're all junk, but but there's so few of them that actually get any success compared to the many thousands that are out there all over the world, including all over the U.S. Who write great material that could potentially be really popular, but it never gets anywhere. And it's not just political artists. I mean, of course, it's most artists generally, and the industry is not good to artists generally, but it's perhaps even worse to any artists who actually have something to say.
Sure, and I think, but they're somewhat tainted by being popular.
Well, I mean, the thing is that that there's that, but I think what's even more insidious is that most artists, I'd say most artists who are actually trying to be successful, to get fans and be financially successful and to have, to make a living and maybe even, who have especially those who have their aim set at more than making a living, but at actually, becoming famous, they already are self-censoring from the time they record their first CD. They're already trying to be acceptable to the major labels, even though the vast majority of them will never even get looked at, let alone signed.
Same as reporters.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean,
same thing.
Same kind of thing. There's so many
Self-censorship.
great reporters out there, but there's a lot of them who are trying to, be very careful from the very beginning because they really want to get a position as CNN anchorman, and they know that's not going to happen if they, write for the nation first.
So you were traveling, as I said earlier, all over the world. How many Occupy sites worldwide were you visiting? Did you even keep track?
Oh, well, I lost count after 25, but I think I probably about 30 around the U.S. and Canada, mostly all over the U.S., but also several in Canada. And before, I was on tour in Europe just before Occupy Wall Street kicked off, and there, of course, they've had their own Occupy Wall Street encampments, but they didn't call it that. They just called them the Indignados, and they, like Occupy Wall Street, they were very much inspired by the Arab Spring, although unlike in Greece or Spain, here in the U.S., it's not hard to find people who have no idea that what they're doing has anything to do with Egypt or Tunisia, but that's the American media and educational system. But still, there's some really kick-ass activists who actually have never heard of what's happening in Tunisia just because they're Americans, and that's how it is here.
What does indignados mean?
The indignant ones.
That's what I thought it would mean.
And they're very numerous, and they've, but they share so many of the characteristics of the Occupy movement here. They are mostly new activists who have no background in activism, just like here, and they also have, like most of the Occupy activists here, they have a sort of, partially it's well thought out and partially it's just instinctive, I think, but a real connection, a real commitment to nonviolent civil disobedience. Which is also quite different from much of the left, especially in places like Greece and Spain, where the Indignados actually are biggest. There the left has, very regularly for a long time engaged in, violent tactics, or at least, tactics that you wouldn't necessarily call nonviolent, like say, they just burned down 45 buildings in Athens the other day. That's typical.
Well, they're responding to the violence that is being done to the 99%.
Oh, absolutely. The overwhelming violence is being committed by the 1%, no question about it. But, it's been a long-standing debate on the left, around the world. How do we respond to these, assaults upon our humanity? And, and the Occupy movement, I think, has, to its credit, I think, embraced the tactic of nonviolent civil disobedience, and specifically the tactic of taking and holding physical space in the center of the town until their demands are met. And of course, or until they get violently kicked out by the police, But in the case of, like in Greece, to take one example, and the Indignados actually took the month of August off, I think last summer, and with the intent of coming back in September. So there is precedent to people deciding because it's too hot or too cold or whatever to take some time off and then go back.
Well, if the issues aren't going away, we're not going away, I guess is what it gets down to.
Well, it's just a matter, I think, of being able to be flexible and change with the circumstances. And like with Occupy Portland, for example, they maintained the camps downtown. Then when the eviction happened, there was a time of transition, and now we have a physical space at St. Francis over at Southeast 12th and Oak, and we have an office space there. We have meeting space. It's a very welcoming and exciting place for people to get to come and have meetings and workshops and really talk about the issues, plan the next actions, plan the strategies around what we can do to keep this movement moving forward. But it was interesting what you mentioned, I think, about the fact that a lot of really brand new activists have come into this, and I think that's something that really makes the Occupy movement very powerful. People who never thought of themselves as activists, both young and old, have said, wow, if this is if getting out in the street and speaking my mind and explaining why, our system is become so ineffective for the majority of people, if that makes me an activist, then I guess I'm an activist. And I think having that really new and exciting energy has really brought a lot to the Occupy movement. And it's really, regardless of whether our demands have been met, we have absolutely 100% changed the debate in this country.
Oh, absolutely.
No one was talking about the 99% and the 1% last year. No one was talking about this major disparity between the richest and the poorest people of this country. No one was talking about the fact that millionaires are not paying their fair share in taxes, and that we need to be able to fund our social programs, and we need to be able to have these safety nets for people. People were not talking. That debate completely shifted, in the fall with the Occupy movement and the fact that thousands of people every day were out in the street speaking about these issues.
Sure. What started out as the dominance of the dictators and the tyrants in the Mideast became the same thing over here, only it was the hegemony of the corporations.
Right. I mean, the difference here is that we actually do get to vote for our elected officials, which was not the case, or if there were votes, they were mostly shams in the Middle East, and we have limits on our politicians being able to be in office for a certain period of time. Mm-hmm. My mic.
Yeah, I think your mic's slipping a little bit.
There we go. Bring it down to the center. Okay. How's that?
All right.
Great. And here we actually do have a vote, but but there's some similarities in that even though we have a vote as to who gets elected, we don't have much say in the people that become the nominees, and frankly, we don't have a lot of really truthful information, I don't think, about what they stand for and what they believe, because everyone's so concerned about making sure they're saying the right things so that they get the money for the election. So, there are some differences, but I think there are some similarities as well, and people are starting to wake up to that.
Mm-hmm. Well, David, were you in other cities in the parts of the country that was having an event that we were having one here, like N17 or what was it, October 6th? And then there was all the situation with the what was going on in D.C. and all the other areas that we're talking about, the XL pipeline. Were you involved in any of those that led up to the what they call the occupation movement, which was really just the most new aspect of something that had been going on for some time?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been involved to one degree or another with the left since I was about 12. So, certainly I've been involved with stuff that's led up to the Occupy movement, because everything that's happened has led up to the Occupy movement in a sense. But, certainly, lots of attempts were made to raise the same kinds of issues by various elements of what we can loosely call the left. For a long time, there have been protests on Wall Street. Some people with my favorite sign, which I don't know if we can actually say on the air, but it was like jump people, in reference to the bankers.
The bankers, I remember that.
In 1929 and the early 30s, it was actually it actually happened a number of times where bankers jumped, and so they were suggesting that might be a good idea now. But it was the taking of and holding of physical space, and the at least well, actually, for the people that started it, the very conscious emulation of the tactics of the Arab Spring in New York City and Occupy Wall Street, these connections by the organizers were very conscious, and these were not, some of the people who organized the initial protests were long-term activists who came out of the Direct Action Network that shut down, the WTO in Seattle. And, but of course, it caught on to a huge extent among young and old, especially young, but all ages and everybody in society. I mean, really, it's the most diverse movement that I've ever seen in the U.S. And I think historians have said it's probably the most diverse movement we've had since the 1930s. I don't know if that's actually
before our time.
Case. It depends on, certainly before my time, but before yours as well. But it is. It's been an impressive movement, and it's not only helped to reshape the debate in the corporate media, which can't avoid talking about it, but it's been a real shot in the arm to all sorts of different initiatives. I mean, it's become a thing where, especially when there was physical, when there were physical spaces being occupied, it was more common that somebody would just show up with a van or a bus or something and say, we're going to go protest at the mayor's office, or we're going to go protest the XL pipeline, or we're going to go do whatever we're going to do. Who wants to come? And then several dozen people jump on the bus, and that ends up in many cases doubling or tripling the size of the protest, which is not saying a lot for the left that the protest was going to be so small in the first place, but it's definitely a shot in the arm. It's not enough, I'd say. It's actually, by mass movement standards, it's quite a small movement, but it has real potential.
But like you were saying at the very beginning of the show with your first song, Stay Right Here, I think Stay Right Here means that we're not going anywhere. even though there's no occupied spaces here.
Right, even though we're not occupying public space at this point. Like I said, Occupy Portland has an office now at St. Francis in Southeast Portland, and we are certainly continuing to grow the movement from there. We will there's a big action actually coming up February 29th
I was going to lead into that.
Great.
Good job. Good
February
job.
29th, shut down the corporations. This is a national day of action that is really focused on targeting corporations that are members of what's called the American Legislative Exchange Council, or ALEC, A-L-E-C. And this is a membership nonprofit organization that's made up of several hundred of the biggest corporations in our country, the Koch brothers, Walmart, Exxon, all are members. And the other members are about 2,000 state legislators around the country. And basically what this does is gives these corporations amazing opportunities to meet and to lobby these legislators, but also what's even more insidious about ALEC is they are actually writing model legislation that benefits these massive corporations, and then these state legislators take it back to their states and introduce it and sometimes get it passed. Actually, the Arizona representative who was behind SB 1070, which was the major anti-immigration bill there, actually wrote that bill after having meetings with the American Legislative Exchange Council and a private prison company, and actually came back and wrote this law and got it passed. So they're also have been linked to the anti-collective bargaining laws that have passed in Wisconsin last year.
In Indiana, and Ohio.
Right. And so they are basically creating a perfect situation for these corporations by writing this legislation, providing it to these legislators who are all too happy to go back to their home states and to introduce it and hope to pass it. And so on February 29th, the Portland Action Lab, which is kind of an offshoot of Occupy Portland, they were the ones that organized the November 17th shut down the bank action here in Portland, and which was also a national day of action across the country. They are organizing the shut down the corporations event, where affinity groups will be getting together and using various nonviolent direct action tactics to actually disrupt businesses at these corporations. And folks will also be marching as part of that to provide support and to call attention to the American Legislative Exchange Council and the very cozy relationship that our state legislators have with these corporations who are literally writing our state laws.
A couple websites: Stop ALEC, stopalec.org, and Shut Down the Corporations, I believe .org is another one. And I was just wondering, are you going to be here in town for that? Are you going to be involved playing at the rally or anything like that?
I'm doing a gig that night in Ferndale, Michigan. So
Michigan.
I'm available. I'll be there all day. If anybody in Detroit is organizing something, I'd be happy to sing at it.
All right.
And then the next day I fly to Europe for the whole spring.
Yeah, you generally spend a lot of time in the spring in Europe, and
yeah, usually spring in Europe, fall over the U.S. is kind of my.
I did want to also just put in one quick
plug. We got about a minute here, so it's got to be quick.
The Solutions Committee with Occupy Portland. We are working on long-term political and legislative solutions to a number of concerns that are uniting the Occupy movement. And we meet on Tuesdays at St. Francis at 6 p.m. And the Reclaiming Democracy work group that's working on this corporate personhood issue meets at 4:30 p.m. on Tuesdays at St. Francis. So folks that are interested in learning more should come and join us.
Right. So as Emma Goldman said, if you can't dance, she doesn't want anything to do with the revolution. Well, David, if you can't sing,
Yeah, people can dance too, although it's not necessarily recommended. I'm not very rhythmic, but, but I like the quote anyway.
It's a great quote, yeah. So, we can laugh, sing, and dance, but we're serious, and we're going to change the situation that's going on in this country. And so thanks for tuning in. I want to thank the crew. We're down to a few seconds. Thank you, David. And thank you, Erin. Back next week.
Thanks, Jim.